where is all this going? Are we fiddling around the edges here? Is 40 megapixels such a great advantage? Where do we go next with these digital mirrorless cameras? Let me know what you think in the comments box below, please. I would very much like to know where you think digital mirrorless cameras can go from here. Hey everybody, thank you once again for checking in, and today we're going to talk about the Fujifilm X-T5. Now, I've used these X cameras for quite some time, since I bought a cheap second-hand X-T10 about 3 years ago. And I loved that camera. I loved it for its film simulations. I loved it for the dials that it had on top, which kind of harked back to the film days. After the X-T10, I had an X-T1, which I loved, and an X-T2, which I really loved. And then I got this X-T3, which is a fantastic little camera. So the big headline feature is this 40 megapixel sensor that this new camera has got. There's been something of a mixed reception to this camera. I've got some notes here from what various people have said. DP Review says there is a big question mark over the autofocus capabilities of the X-T5. Amateur photographer found no problems. They found the focus fine, and they called the camera a 40 megapixel stills sensation, so they approve. Petapixel have don't really err on the positive side. They say, unfortunately, there are several areas where the X-T5 falls short of competitors and expectations for a brand new camera with the most advanced features. The autofocus is particularly subpar compared to any other system on the market. Well, that doesn't sound terribly good. In an era where cameras are adding AI processors to their cameras to get faster and more accurate focus, the X-T5 feels like it's falling behind in a critical race. Well, now, that doesn't sound like terribly good news, does it? I mean, I've not used an X-T5, but apparently it is a little slower. The autofocus is a little slower than, really, according to Petapixel, all of the camera's competitors. And that's really not great news. Autofocus systems should be getting quicker, not slower. Having said that, it's very difficult to think how they could get quicker. I mean, this X-T3 of mine focuses, gosh, I don't know, almost instantaneously. So it's difficult to know how focusing times could get quicker, but apparently they can, and apparently the X-T5 doesn't seem quite up to par in that area. Now then, let's think about this sensor with its massive resolution. Well, now 40 megapixels, yeah, that sounds great. And I'm sure for many purposes it really is great. I mean, it would be fantastic to shoot at that resolution and be able to crop down, to smaller details. You can crop down, you can lose half of that shot and still have a 20 megapixel shot available to you. You can lose 3/4 of it and still have 10 megapixels available to you. So cropping, yeah, if you do a lot of cropping, if you do street photography, for example, and you need to find that you're needing to crop quite a lot of your shots to to just frame them up perfectly, then 40 megapixels is going to be a really fantastic thing for you. That's going to be a real boon to your photography. However, various websites, various people who've used this camera have explained that it brings a little more noise. Noise is actually increased, and I think that does seem to be a tendency across the X-Trans sensor range. It's a general rule that with more resolution, more megapixels, comes more electronic noise. And gosh, you know, I'm not an electronics engineer, but that's not entirely surprising when you think about it. If you've got more of those little pixels doing more of their little pixely things, then yeah, they're going to create more errors simply because there are more of them. So more noise, yeah, that seems reasonable. Is that a good trade-off for 40 megapixels? Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're shooting at high ISO, that's going to be quite tricky, isn't it? I mean, these cameras have an APS-C sensor, and that's quite a small sensor now. Why Fuji haven't gone for a full-frame sensor in the X-T5, I'm really not sure. That does seem to be becoming the industry standard now. It is a mirrorless camera, and while there are some fantastic Fujifilm lenses around for these Fujifilm cameras, of course mirrorless are great to shoot vintage lenses on as well, and vintage lenses really give their best when they're on a full frame sensor. They work great on smaller sensor cameras, sure. I've shot loads of vintage lenses on APS-C and really enjoyed the results, but the best results, I think, the full character of the lens really comes through on full frame. It will be great commercially for them. That is where the market is going, and I can't really see that changing in the future. And can you imagine how good would a Fujifilm XT full frame camera be with those film simulations, with those beautiful delicious JPEGs straight out of camera? My gosh, yeah, I would buy one of those. I think that would make them, you know, put them right out there, right at the front of the industry. So yeah, I hope they consider that for future incarnations of these XT cameras. Now then, I was not pleased to see that the flippy screen has gone from the X-T5. The X-T4 had a flippy screen, and if you've watched this channel before, you might know that I think flippy screens are a real boon to any mirrorless camera. And what I mean is a screen that articulates in such a way that it will fold around out to the front, so that when you're looking at the camera you can display it here right alongside, and if you're looking at the front of the camera you can actually see your image. It's sometimes referred to as a selfie screen, in a slightly deprecating way, I think. I don't see what's wrong with self-portraits. You know, many of the great artists painted self-portraits, and I don't necessarily see that it's a bad thing to take a self-portrait. I know a lot of photographers have approved of this decision. A lot of photographers, that is, people who are into stills photography only rather than video shooting as well, a lot of them have you know, really welcomed this change and said, no, we don't want a screen that flips out to the front. We don't want a flippy screen. We don't want a selfie screen. Well, now, I don't really get that myself. I really don't get that. It's like, why is taking functionality out of a camera a good thing? I just don't see that. If you don't want to use the flippy screen, if you don't want to use it for self-portraits or video or whatever else you might want to use it for, you don't have to. Just don't flip it round. I think it's really unfortunate that Fujifilm have gone back to this, what do they call it, two-way or three-way articulating screen, which does articulate a lot, I must admit. It'll come out in the usual way, this way, so that you can see what you're shooting, and it will also come out, if I can find the button to do it, where is it now? Oh yeah, it will also turn out this way so that you can articulate it that way as well. Personally, I've never found a great use for that articulation. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I'd personally much prefer a flippy screen, and I do lament that that has gone from the Fuji X cameras, because I think it's a really useful feature. There we are, that's just me. What else have we to say? I've got all my notes. Look, I've gone all computerized this week. How cool is that? Right, the X-T5 is less orientated to video than was the X-T4. It still shoots really nice video, but it doesn't quite shoot the quality of video of its sister camera, the X-H2. The X-H2 will shoot very, very capable video. The X-T5 doesn't shoot quite as nice video and is slightly disabled in that area. Even though it has the same sensor, it clearly doesn't have the same processing capabilities for video as the X-H2. So if you shoot a lot of video, you really want absolute top of the shot, best that you can get video, the X-H2 would be the camera for you. If you're more oriented towards stills, then the X-T5 would suit you better. Personally, I think it would be nice to have all of that functionality built into the one camera. I think it's a shame that cameras get disabled like that, but there we are. That's a market strategy, and that's how they're working it. The exposure compensation dial is, I'm glad to say, a little bigger on the X-T5 than it was on the X-T4, and that's one complaint I do have about these X-T cameras. The dial is here just on the right hand edge, that's on the left hand side if you're looking at your screen, and I never found it easy to move that with my thumb while my camera was up to my eye. I always found it a little bit tricky because it just isn't big enough. It doesn't overhang the edge of the camera quite enough. In fact, it doesn't overhang it at all, so you've got no friction. You can't really turn it so easily. That's now bigger. I hope there's enough grip on it to turn nice and easily, so when you've got the camera to your eye, you can do it without having to take it away and go, oh yeah, where am I? Because that does kind of spoil your flow a little bit, you know, when you're in the flow of doing your photography. You don't really want to have to take the camera down from your eye. You want it to be a seamless experience, and so with that control being larger, hopefully that is what we will find in the X-T5. The body of the X-T5 is a little smaller than that of the X-T4 was. The X-T1 was the smallest of the X-T cameras, and they have gained in size since then. I'm very glad to say that the X-T5 has reversed that trend, and it's gone back to being a smaller camera, and apparently it's almost the size of the old X-T1, so around about X-T2 size, something like that, I would imagine. This is the X-T3. Apparently this has grown in size since the X-T1. I don't really notice it, to be honest, and I wouldn't call this too big a camera. Strangely, these Fujifilm cameras with their APS-C sensors are bigger than the Sony A7 cameras, certainly bigger than my original Sony A7 Mark I. Never really understood that, but I don't find them too big. However, I am glad to see that the X-T5 reverses that trend. I think big cameras, you know, the trend towards bigger and bigger cameras is not a great thing. I appreciate it might be difficult to pack all the extra electronics in, but the great advantage, one of the great advantages of mirrorless is that it was smaller. All the mirrorless cameras were smaller than those hulking great DSLRs that we all used to use, and it will be a shame if we lose that advantage from cameras becoming bigger and bigger over time. So the latest incarnation of the Fujifilm X series, the X-T5, a 40 megapixel APS-C camera. Possibly some problems with autofocus, though I personally suspect that it's entirely fast enough. Possibly some problems with higher noise at the higher ISO settings. I think that's potentially more of a problem, although again I would imagine it's not too much of an increase over previous cameras, although it is noticeable enough for various reviewers to comment on it, so there is that. Where is all this going? Are we fiddling around the edges here? Is 40 megapixels such a great advantage? Where do we go next with these digital mirrorless cameras? This XT3 here, for example, I don't know, when was it released? 3-4 years ago, maybe, if that. This has got so many bells and whistles on it. It's got more bells and whistles than I could ever ring or blow in probably in a lifetime. The XT4's got yet more, the XT5 has even more. Again, I would assume. So where do we go from here? Where does the megapixel race end? What more is there to offer with digital mirrorless cameras? What are we going to see next, for example? Are we going to see a camera that makes toast? Actually, that would be a really good thing, wouldn't it? It would have to be quite big, though. I'm being silly. But do you see what I mean? My question is, where do we go from here? And what has the industry to offer us over and above what it's already given? I would suggest to Fujifilm, who am I to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, I would suggest to Fujifilm that they get busy on a full frame sensor if they want to offer us even more than they've already given us with these superb cameras, and I really do love them. And I do think that's the way for them to go. That would be an absolute knockout camera. It would be an industry leader, and those beautiful film simulations of JPEGs, so that you get beautiful JPEGs straight out of camera, that would really put the tin hat on it. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments box below, please. I would very much like to know where you think digital mirrorless cameras can go from here. So that's it from me for now. Please don't forget to do all those YouTube-y type things, which are, I ought to know them by now, like, subscribe, ring the bell, and thank you very, very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the episode. Many, many thanks go to our subscribers. Many thanks for your continued support, and many, many thanks go to patrons for your continued support. Patrons, old patrons, new patrons who've just joined, patrons who've been with us for a while and left. Many, many thanks to everybody for your support. So that's it from me for now. Many thanks for watching, and if you're not doing anything, next week around this time, please do join me for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.